Welcome to Rest with the Wild, where we journey through time with nature's greatest stories. I'm here to guide you through the remarkable world of one of Earth's most misunderstood creatures, sharing tales that span millions of years and countless cultures. Before we begin, if you find peace in these stories, please subscribe to join our growing community and let us know in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. High above the emerald canopy of Central America, something moves with deliberate grace through branches thick as ancient pillars. The sound reaches you first, not the crash of heavy movement, but the whisper of careful placement, claws finding purchase on bark worn smooth by countless seasons. This is the realm of the sloth, where time moves differently, where patience becomes a superpower, and where survival depends not on speed, but on something far more profound. Tonight, we trace the extraordinary journey of creatures whose ancestors once walked alongside mastodons, whose lineage stretches back 40 million years to a world we can barely imagine. In the lowland rainforests of Costa Rica, mist clings to cecropia trees, while their inhabitant hangs motionless, appearing as nothing more than a moss-covered branch. Three-toed sloths, like this one, carry gardens in their fur, a living ecosystem of algae and moths that has evolved alongside them for millennia. The algae provides camouflage and nutrition, while the moths complete their life cycle in the rich environment of sloth fur. This is mutualism perfected, a partnership so intricate it defies our understanding of individual versus community. Moving north through the mountain cloud forests of Panama, we encounter their two-toed cousins, equally remarkable, but following an entirely different evolutionary path. Despite their names suggesting kinship, these creatures represent separate branches of an ancient tree, each having independently discovered the art of living thoughtfully in a world obsessed with haste. But to truly understand these modern marvels, we must journey backward through deep time, to an era when their relatives commanded respect through sheer magnitude. Picture creatures the size of elephants, with claws like sabers and the power to rear up on hind legs taller than any human. These were the ground sloths, Megatherium, Eremitherium, and dozens of other species that dominated landscapes from Alaska to Argentina. From those titans emerged the gentle creatures we know today, carrying forward an unbroken genetic legacy that spans the rise and fall of ice ages, the birth of human civilization, and the transformation of continents. Their story interweaves with ours through folklore and legend, through scientific discovery and cultural meaning, creating a tapestry rich with wonder. The forests they inhabit stretch across a vast geographic canvas, from the mangroves of Brazil's Atlantic coast, through the cloud forests of the Andes, from the dry forests of Venezuela to the pristine wilderness of Guyana. Each ecosystem has shaped its sloth inhabitants differently, creating subtle variations in behavior, diet, and survival strategies that scientists are only beginning to understand. In the Amazon, indigenous peoples have watched these creatures for thousands of years, weaving them into stories that speak of forest spirits and the deep wisdom of moving thoughtfully through the world. The Matsugenka of Peru describe beings with sloth-like qualities as guardians of forest balance, while Brazilian folklore tells of the mysterious Mapinguari, a creature of legend that may carry echoes of encounters with the last ground sloths. Modern research reveals layer upon layer of complexity beneath their serene exterior. Sloths practice heterothermy, allowing their body temperature to fluctuate with their environment in ways that would be dangerous for other mammals. They descend from their trees only once a week, in a ritual so mysterious that scientists still debate its evolutionary purpose. Their metabolism operates at a pace that allows them to thrive on leaves that would poison most other creatures, extracting every possible nutrient from food sources others cannot even digest. Tonight, our path winds through 40 million years of evolution, across continents and cultures, through the laboratories of patient researchers and the oral traditions of forest peoples. We will meet the scientists who first tried to understand these enigmatic creatures, often misinterpreting their nature through the lens of their own hurried world. We will hear the voices of those who have shared the forest with sloths for generations, learning patience and persistence from neighbors who measure their lives in seasons rather than seconds. From the fossil beds of Argentina to the canopy research stations of Costa Rica, from the creation stories of the Tupi-Guarani to the conservation success stories unfolding in today's protected forests, this is a journey through time itself. Each chapter reveals new layers of understanding about creatures who have mastered the art of being present, of finding abundance in simplicity, and of thriving through strategies that defy conventional wisdom about survival. As we settle into this exploration together, let the gentle sounds of the rainforest carry you deeper into rest. Feel the humid warmth of tropical air. Hear the distant calls of howler monkeys welcoming the night, and sense the patient presence of creatures who have watched the world change around them with the calm wisdom of ages. Our story begins in the deep past, when the Americas themselves were taking shape, when the creatures we know today were still encoded in the genes of their magnificent ancestors. But it reaches forward too, into research stations and rescue centers, into the hands of conservationists working to ensure that future generations will know the quiet magic of encountering a sloth in its native forest. From the smallest three-toed sloth hanging in a single tree to the vast ecosystems that support entire communities of these remarkable creatures. From the individual moth completing its life cycle in sloth fur to the continental scale migrations of their ancestors. Tonight, we explore connections that span scales of time and space almost too vast to comprehend. In a museum vault in Buenos Aires, a single fossil claw rests in careful preservation, its curve as long as a human forearm and sharp as any blade ever forged. This is not the delicate hook of today's tree-dwelling sloths, but the massive excavating tool of Megatherium americanum, a creature that stood 12 feet tall and weighed as much as a modern elephant. The claw tells a story written in calcium and time, each groove and ridge recording a life spent reshaping landscapes. Unlike the gentle, grasping claws of their descendants, these were earth movers, designed to dig vast burrows and strip bark from trees that would dwarf today's forest giants. When you trace the fossil's edge with scientific instruments, microscopic wear patterns reveal how these creatures lived, scraping, digging, and manipulating their environment with a power that modern sloths have traded for subtlety. This single artifact opens a window into the Miocene epoch, 20 million years ago, when South America existed as an isolated continent surrounded by ocean. In this separated world, mammals evolved along pathways impossible anywhere else on Earth. Giant ground sloths emerged as one of nature's most successful experiments, diversifying into forms that would colonize every habitat from tropical rainforests to windswept Patagonian plains. Megatherium was just one member of an extraordinary family. In the caves of Brazil, paleontologists have uncovered Erymatherium laureladi, another titan that stretched 20 feet from nose to tail. Unlike its southern cousin, Erymatherium ventured north, becoming one of the first large mammals to cross the land bridge that connected North and South America during the Great American Interchange 3 million years ago. This monumental event in Earth's history saw creatures flowing in both directions across the newly formed Isthmus of Panama. Horses and cats traveled south while ground sloths, armadillos, and terror birds moved north. Erymatherium established populations from Florida to Mexico, leaving behind fossils that would puzzle European explorers centuries later, who could not imagine such creatures had ever walked the Americas. The success of ground sloths across this vast range speaks to their remarkable adaptability. In the grasslands of Argentina, Megatherium used those massive claws to excavate underground dens large enough to shelter their enormous bulk. These burrows, called paleoburrows, can still be found today, tunnels carved into solid rock by creatures whose strength exceeded that of any modern excavator. In Brazil's Rondônia region, Similar tunnels stretch for hundreds of meters underground, their walls polished smooth by the repeated passage of giant bodies. Some contain scratch marks from claws, preserved in stone like prehistoric graffiti, offering intimate glimpses of behaviors from animals that disappeared before humans developed writing. The diversity of ground sloth species challenges every assumption about how large herbivores should live. Megalonyx, smaller than its giant relatives, but still larger than a black bear, developed different strategies entirely. Its fossils from North American caves suggest a creature equally comfortable on ground and in trees, perhaps representing an evolutionary bridge between the terrestrial giants and the arboreal specialists we know today. In the high valleys of the Andes, Glossopterium inhabited regions where modern sloths could never survive. Their fossils appear alongside those of ancient llamas and spectacled bears, suggesting a creature adapted to thin air and cold temperatures, environmental conditions that would challenge even the most adaptable modern sloths. The end of their reign came swiftly in geological terms. Around 13,000 years ago, as the last ice age waned and human populations expanded throughout the Americas, the age of giant ground sloths drew to a close. The largest species vanished first, followed by their smaller relatives, until only the tree-dwelling survivors remained. Recent discoveries, however, suggest this story may be more complex than once believed. In remote corners of the Amazon rainforest, researchers have found ground sloth remains that date to just 8,000 years ago, far more recent than the accepted extinction timeline. Caves in Brazil's Mato Grosso region have yielded dung deposits and hair samples that challenge our understanding of when these creatures truly disappeared. Some specimens appear to represent dwarf species that survived in isolated forest refugia long after their plain-dwelling relatives succumbed to climate change and human hunting pressure. These discoveries hint at the possibility that some ground sloth lineages persisted into the Holocene, their survival strategies allowing them to endure in protected pockets of habitat while the world transformed around them. The question of what drove the extinctions continues to generate scientific debate. Climate change certainly played a role, as warming temperatures transformed the grasslands that supported the larger species. But the arrival of human hunters armed with sophisticated weapons may have provided the final pressure that these magnificent creatures could not overcome. Evidence from kill sites across both continents suggests that humans did indeed hunt ground sloths, though whether this hunting caused their extinction or merely hastened an inevitable decline remains uncertain. What seems clear is that the combination of environmental change and human pressure created conditions these ancient lineages could not survive. Yet survive they did, in a sense. Hidden in the genes of modern tree sloths lies the genetic heritage of those vanished giants. Recent molecular studies reveal that today's three-toed sloths carry DNA sequences that connect them directly to Megatherium, while two-toed sloths show closer relationships to the mylodontid ground sloths that once roamed from Alaska to Chile. These genetic connections tell us that the transition from ground to trees happened not once, but multiple times in sloth evolutionary history. Different lineages independently discovered the advantages of arboreal life, developing similar solutions to the challenges of surviving in forest canopies. The fossil record documents this transition in remarkable detail. Intermediate forms show the gradual elongation of limbs, the development of powerful grasping claws, and the reduction in overall body size that allowed access to the forest's upper stories. Each adaptation represents countless generations of natural selection, fine-tuning these creatures for life among the branches. In museum collections around the world, the skeletal remains of dozens of ground sloth species preserve evidence of this extraordinary evolutionary radiation. From the massive femur bones of Megatherium to the delicate vertebrae of small tree-dwelling ancestors, these fossils chronicle one of mammalian evolution's most successful experiments in living large. Today, when a three-toed sloth moves through the Costa Rican canopy, with deliberate precision. It carries forward 40 million years of evolutionary refinement. The same genetic blueprint that once built creatures capable of reshaping landscapes now constructs animals perfectly adapted to life in the trees, proving that evolution's greatest achievements often come not from growing larger, but from learning to thrive in entirely new ways. The ancient claws that once carved burrows in bedrock have become hooks for hanging from branches. The massive muscles that once supported multi-ton bodies now provide the endurance needed for a life lived mostly upside down. The story written in that single fossil claw continues to unfold in every movement of their living descendants, connecting past and present in an unbroken chain of adaptation and survival. Field notes from 1749 reveal the first European attempt to understand these enigmatic creatures, penned by the French naturalist Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon. His observations, recorded in elegant script within the pages of his Histoire naturelle, would shape European perception of sloths for generations, unfortunately not always accurately. Buffon had never seen a living sloth in its natural environment. Working from preserved specimens sent across the Atlantic, he described creatures he believed to be fundamentally flawed by nature's design. Slowness, stupidity, and neglect, he wrote, seemed to be their natural character. His influential writings painted sloths as examples of nature's failures, creatures so poorly adapted that they survived only through geographic isolation from more capable animals. These early mischaracterizations stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding of what European scientists were observing. Specimens arrived in European museums after long sea voyages, often damaged or incomplete. The delicate structures that allow sloths to thrive in forest canopies, their specialized joints, their unique muscle arrangements, their intricate claw mechanisms, were reduced to curiosities that seemed to serve no logical purpose. The scientific naming of sloths began with Carl Linnaeus in 1758, who formalized the genus Bradypus in his groundbreaking Systema Naturae. The name itself reflects the European bias of the era. Bradypus literally means slowfoot in Latin, cementing the perception that these creatures were defined primarily by what they lacked rather than what they possessed. Linnaeus described Bradypus tridactylus, the three-toed sloth, as the type species for the genus. His systematic approach provided the foundation for all future sloth taxonomy, even as his understanding of their biology remained limited by the specimens available to him. The precision of his naming system would prove essential as naturalists began to discover the true diversity of sloth species across the Americas. The first significant breakthrough in understanding sloth biology came through the work of early explorer naturalists who ventured into South American forests. Alexander von Humboldt, during his epic journey through the Amazon in the early 1800s, provided some of the first detailed observations of living sloths in their natural habitat. Humboldt's journals describe encounters with creatures that bore little resemblance to the sluggish failures described in European textbooks. He documented their remarkable ability to move through forest canopies, their complex relationships with other forest species, and their sophisticated adaptations to arboreal life. His observations began to shift scientific understanding away from Buffon's dismissive characterizations toward recognition of sloths as highly specialized rather than simply deficient. The discovery of fossil ground sloths in the early 19th century revolutionized scientific understanding of sloth evolution. When paleontologists began uncovering massive ground sloth remains across South America, the living species suddenly made sense as survivors of a much more diverse and successful lineage rather than evolutionary dead ends. Charles Darwin himself encountered ground sloth fossils during his voyage on the Beagle. Describing Megatherium, remains found in Argentina. His observations of both fossil and living sloths contributed to his developing understanding of evolution, providing evidence for the connections between extinct giants and their modern descendants. The 20th century brought increasingly sophisticated tools for studying sloth biology. Researchers developed techniques for observing these animals in forest canopies using platforms and walkways to study behavior that had previously been invisible to science. Radiotelemetry allowed scientists to track individual sloths over extended periods, revealing complex patterns of movement and habitat use that challenged assumptions about their sedentary nature. One of the most significant revelations came from genetic research conducted in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. DNA analysis revealed that the traditional classification of all modern sloths into a single family was incorrect. Instead, molecular evidence showed that two-toed and three-toed sloths had evolved their arboreal lifestyle independently, representing convergent evolution rather than common ancestry. This discovery fundamentally restructured the sloth family tree. Modern genetics revealed that two-toed sloths are more closely related to the extinct mylodontid ground sloths, while three-toed sloths share closer connections with the megalonychid lineage. The similarities between modern sloth species, their arboreal adaptations, their deliberate movements, their specialized digestive systems, represent independent solutions to the challenge of surviving in forest canopies. Contemporary research continues to unveil layers of complexity in sloth biology that early naturalists could never have imagined. Studies of sloth fur reveal ecosystems in miniature, with dozens of species of algae, fungi, and arthropods living in specialized niches within individual animals' coats. The moth-algae sloth relationship, discovered in recent decades, represents one of the most intricate mutualistic relationships documented in mammalian biology. Physiological research has revealed the extraordinary nature of sloth metabolism. Their ability to practice heterothermy, allowing body temperature to fluctuate with environmental conditions, represents an adaptation that would be dangerous or impossible for most other mammals. This metabolic flexibility allows sloths to survive on nutritionally poor diets while maintaining the energy needed for reproduction and survival. The development of isotope analysis has opened new windows into sloth ecology. By examining the chemical signatures in sloth hair and tissues, researchers can reconstruct detailed pictures of diet, movement patterns, and habitat use. These techniques have revealed that sloths are far more selective in their feeding than previously understood, choosing specific leaves based on nutritional content and chemical composition. Modern conservation research has brought urgency to sloth studies. As forest habitats face increasing pressure from human activities, understanding sloth ecology becomes critical for developing effective protection strategies. Radiotelemetry studies have revealed how sloths respond to habitat fragmentation, while genetic research helps identify distinct populations that may require separate conservation approaches. The story of scientific discovery continues to evolve as new technologies provide fresh insights into sloth biology. Accelerometers attached to wild sloths reveal the intricacies of their movement patterns, while thermal imaging documents their temperature regulation strategies. Each technological advance adds new chapters to our understanding of creatures that have been successfully navigating forest canopies for millions of years. From Buffon's dismissive characterizations to today's recognition of sloths as evolutionary marvels, the journey of scientific discovery reflects our growing appreciation for nature's diversity of solutions to survival challenges. The research doorway that first opened with those flawed 18th century observations now reveals vistas of biological complexity that continue to surprise and inspire researchers around the world. The names that echo through this scientific journey, Buffon, Linnaeus, Humboldt, Darwin, represent not just individual contributions, but humanity's evolving relationship with the natural world. Each generation of researchers has built upon the work of their predecessors, gradually assembling a more complete and accurate picture of these remarkable creatures and their place in the web of life. Among the Tupi-Guarani peoples of the Amazon basin, elders speak of the Mapinguari in voices that carry both reverence and caution. This creature of legend walks upright through the deepest forest, its backward-facing feet confusing any who might try to track it. its penetrating odor announcing its presence long before it appears. The tales describe a being of immense strength and mysterious purpose, guardian of forest secrets that humans are not meant to disturb. When ethnographers first recorded these stories in the early 20th century, they noted remarkable parallels between Mapinguari descriptions and what paleontologists were discovering about ancient ground sloths. The creature's size, its upright posture, its association with deep forest, these elements suggest that indigenous oral traditions may preserve echoes of encounters with the last surviving giant sloths. Memories passed down through countless generations of storytellers. The Mapinguari legends vary between communities along the Amazon's tributaries, but certain elements remain consistent. The creature is said to possess a mouth in its belly, a detail that some researchers interpret as a cultural memory of the large chest cavity and prominent sternum of ground sloths. Its cry, described as haunting and unlike any known forest animal, echoes descriptions of sounds that no living creature in the Amazon produces today. In the traditions of the Kayapo people, different stories emerge. Tales of forest beings who move with deliberate wisdom through the canopy, teaching patience to those who observe them carefully. These narratives focus not on fearsome encounters, but on the deeper lessons that come from watching creatures who have mastered the art of thoughtful existence. Traveling south through the dense forests of Peru, the Matsugenka people have long recognized spirits that embody the slow, powerful movements characteristic of sloth behavior. Ethnographic records from the late 19th century document beliefs in forest guardians whose strength comes not from speed or aggression, but from a deep understanding of forest rhythms and cycles. The Matsugenka describe these beings as possessing an almost supernatural ability to remain motionless for extended periods, becoming indistinguishable from the forest itself until they choose to reveal their presence. This description mirrors the behavior of modern sloths so precisely that it suggests thousands of years of careful observation encoded into spiritual beliefs that honor rather than fear these remarkable capabilities. Their creation stories speak of a time when all forest creatures moved with this same deliberate grace, when haste was unknown and every action carried weight and meaning. According to these traditions, most animals eventually chose speed over wisdom, but a few retained the ancient knowledge of how to live in harmony with forest time rather than fighting against it. In the cloud forests of the Andes, archaeological evidence reveals that various indigenous groups have encountered and interpreted sloth relatives for millennia. Cave paintings in regions where ground sloths once roamed show large bear-like creatures with massive claws, depicted alongside human figures in ways that suggest both fear and respect. The Quechua and Aymara peoples of the high Andes preserve legends of powerful forest beings called ukuku, or bear spirits, though some descriptions include characteristics, such as enormous claws used for digging rather than hunting, that align more closely with ground sloth anatomy than with any bear species native to the region. These mountain cultures developed complex relationships with the concept of creatures that could reshape landscapes through patient, persistent effort. Their stories often emphasize the transformation of terrain through slow but inexorable work, values that reflected their own agricultural practices of terracing steep mountain slopes through generations of careful labor. The spiritual significance of these legends extends beyond simple animal stories. In Andean cosmology, creatures capable of patient transformative work represent connections between the earthly realm and the deeper spiritual forces that shape the world. The ground sloth characteristics preserved in folklore, their digging abilities, their size, their association with caves and hidden places, fit perfectly into these spiritual frameworks. Moving north into Mesoamerica, the archaeological record becomes more complex. In the limestone caves of the Yucatan Peninsula, Maya sites have yielded both ground sloth fossils and evidence of human habitation, though the temporal relationship between these remains continues to generate scholarly debate. While no verified Maya myths specifically reference sloth-like creatures, the archaeological context suggests that these ancient civilizations were certainly aware of ground sloth remains. Cave systems sacred to the Maya contain fossils of Eremitherium and other extinct megafauna, integrated into ritual spaces in ways that suggest these remains held spiritual significance. The Maya conception of underworld deities included beings associated with caves and hidden places, characteristics that align with what we know about ground sloth behavior. Some researchers suggest that encounters with ground sloth fossils in sacred cave systems may have influenced mythological descriptions of underworld guardians, though this connection remains speculative rather than definitively established. What seems clear from the archaeological evidence is that indigenous peoples throughout the Americas developed sophisticated understanding of the extinct megafauna they encountered through fossil remains, or possibly direct contact with surviving populations. The integration of these discoveries into spiritual and cultural frameworks demonstrates the deep ecological knowledge that characterized indigenous relationships with their environments. The consistency of certain themes across these diverse cultures, the association of sloth-like creatures with wisdom, patience, and hidden knowledge, suggests that these traits were widely recognized and valued. Rather than viewing slowness as a deficiency, indigenous perspectives often interpreted deliberate movement as a sign of deeper understanding and spiritual connection. In Brazilian folklore beyond the Amazon, stories persist of creatures called preguiça gigante, or giant sloths, beings that once walked the earth with the power to move mountains through patient effort. These tales, collected by folklorists in rural communities, describe creatures that could live for centuries, accumulating wisdom that surpassed human understanding. The recurring theme of longevity in these stories reflects accurate ecological understanding. Sloths do indeed live longer than most mammals of comparable size, with some individuals reaching ages of several decades. The cultural interpretation of this longevity as a source of wisdom demonstrates the sophisticated ecological knowledge embedded in indigenous worldviews. Contemporary indigenous communities continue to hold sloths in special regard, viewing them as teachers of important life principles. The Shipibo people of the Peruvian Amazon describe sloths as professors of the forest, creatures whose behavior demonstrates the value of taking time to observe and understand before acting. These modern perspectives build upon thousands of years of cultural interaction with sloth species, creating a rich tapestry of beliefs that honor the unique qualities these creatures bring to forest ecosystems. The stories serve not only as entertainment, but as repositories of ecological knowledge, preserving observations about sloth behavior and forest relationships that complement and sometimes exceed contemporary scientific understanding. The sound of wind through Cecropia leaves carries these ancient stories forward, each rustle holding echoes of the voices that first recognized the profound wisdom embodied in creatures who measure their lives, not in heartbeats, but in seasons, not in distance traveled, but in connections maintained with the complex web of forest life. During the early decades of the 16th century, Spanish conquistadors venturing into the depths of South American rainforests encountered creatures that defied every category in their European understanding of the natural world. Francisco López de Gómara, chronicling these early expeditions, described what he called monstrous curiosities that hung motionless in trees for hours, moving so rarely that soldiers often mistook them for moss-covered branches until sudden movement revealed their true nature. These first European accounts reveal as much about the observers as the observed. Hernán Cortés's expedition records describe sloths as creatures of such profound laziness that they seem more plant than animal, while other explorers characterize them as examples of New World degeneracy, living proof that American nature produced inferior versions of Old World forms. The economic motivations driving these expeditions left little room for careful natural observation. Conquistadors seeking gold and conquistadors mapping trade routes had neither time nor inclination to study creatures that appeared to contribute nothing to imperial wealth. Early colonial reports dismissed sloths as curiosities unworthy of serious attention, specimens to be preserved in alcohol and shipped back to European courts as exotic novelties. By the 17th century, as colonial settlements became established throughout Central and South America, European perspectives on sloths began to solidify into the characterizations that would dominate natural history for centuries. The influential writings of Buffon, drawing from colonial specimens and second-hand accounts, cemented the perception of sloths as nature's mistakes, creatures so poorly designed that they survived only through geographic isolation from superior European fauna. This dismissive attitude reflected broader European colonial attitudes toward American nature. The theory of American degeneracy, popular among 18th century European intellectuals, proposed that the New World produced weakened, inferior versions of Old World species. Sloths became poster animals for this theory, cited as evidence that American environments degraded rather than enhanced the creatures living within them. The economic impact of these perceptions extended beyond mere scientific curiosity. Colonial administrators saw no value in protecting creatures they viewed as evolutionary failures. Unlike jaguars, whose pelts commanded high prices, or parrots, whose exotic beauty appealed to European collectors, sloths offered nothing that colonial economies recognized as valuable. Indigenous knowledge about sloth behavior and ecology was systematically ignored or dismissed as superstition. Spanish colonial records contain occasional references to native beliefs about forest spirits with sloth-like characteristics, but these accounts typically frame indigenous perspectives as primitive folklore rather than legitimate ecological knowledge. The 18th century brought the rise of natural history as a fashionable pursuit among European aristocrats, creating new markets for exotic specimens and detailed accounts of foreign creatures. Sloths began appearing in private menageries and public exhibitions, though often as examples of nature's curiosities rather than as subjects worthy of serious study. Travel writers of this period contributed to the popularization of dismissive attitudes towards sloths. Published accounts of grand tours through the Americas invariably included descriptions of these indolent creatures, often using sloths as metaphors for the supposed laziness they attributed to tropical climates and their human inhabitants. The economic exploitation of Central and South American forests proceeded with little consideration for sloth habitat requirements. Colonial timber operations, sugar plantations, and cattle ranching transformed vast areas of forest into agricultural land, eliminating sloth populations without any recognition of what was being lost. By the early 19th century, however, the tide of European opinion began to shift. The Romantic movement's emphasis on the sublime in nature created new appreciation for creatures that embodied patience and contemplation rather than aggression and speed. Natural philosophers like Alexander von Humboldt brought first-hand forest experience to European audiences, describing sloths not as failures, but as marvels of adaptation to arboreal life. This period also saw the emergence of more systematic natural history research. Museums began organizing expeditions specifically to study, rather than simply collect specimens, leading to more accurate observations of sloth behavior and anatomy. The discovery of fossil ground sloths provided evolutionary context that transformed understanding of modern species from dead ends to survivors. The Industrial Revolution created new pressures on sloth populations while simultaneously generating new interest in their conservation. Railroad construction through Central American forests fragmented sloth habitats, while growing international trade in exotic pets created markets for live sloth specimens. European and North American zoos began competing to acquire sloths for public display, though early captive care practices often proved inadequate for creatures with such specialized requirements. The late 19th century brought the first serious conservation concerns about sloth populations. Naturalists working in increasingly developed regions of Central America reported declining sloth numbers and called for protective measures. However, these early conservation efforts often focused on preserving specimens for scientific study rather than protecting living populations in their natural habitats. Scientific expeditions of this period began documenting the intricate relationships between sloths and their forest ecosystems. Researchers discovered the complex moth-algae-sloth partnerships that had evolved over millions of years, revealing levels of biological sophistication that challenged earlier dismissive characterizations. The emergence of photography as a documentation tool provided new ways to share accurate images of sloths with international audiences. For the first time, people could see these creatures in their natural positions, rather than the distorted poses typical of preserved museum specimens. Photographic evidence began to shift public perception away from ridicule toward fascination. Early 20th century conservation movements began recognizing sloths as indicators of forest health rather than inconsequential curiosities. Researchers documented how sloth presence correlated with intact canopy ecosystems, making them valuable subjects for habitat protection efforts. The development of ecotourism in the mid-20th century created new economic incentives for sloth conservation. Visitors willing to pay for guided forest experiences specifically to observe wild sloths provided local communities with alternative income sources that depended on maintaining rather than destroying forest habitats. Yet questions remained about how centuries of dismissive attitudes had shaped both scientific understanding and conservation priorities. How many populations had been lost during the colonial period when no one considered them worth protecting? How much traditional ecological knowledge had been dismissed along with the cultures that developed it? In a village along the Rio Negro, twilight settles as Grandmother Yara gathers her grandchildren around the evening fire. The day's work is finished, the forest sounds begin their nightly symphony, and it's time for the stories that have been passed down through generations like precious seeds, each telling planting wisdom that will grow in young minds. Listen well, she begins, her voice carrying the weight of countless retellings. For this is the tale of the Mapinguari, the forest guardian whose backward feet confuse those foolish enough to hunt what should remain hidden. Her weathered hands trace shapes in the air as she speaks, drawing the creature's massive form against the backdrop of dancing firelight. The children lean closer, knowing this story well but hungry for each familiar detail, each carefully preserved element that connects them to their ancestors' understanding of the deep forest. Long before your father's fathers walked these paths, Grandmother Yara continues, the forest was home to creatures of immense power and wisdom. The Mapinguari was the greatest among them, tall as three men standing on each other's shoulders, strong enough to uproot the mightiest trees, yet gentle to those who approached with respect rather than greed. The tale unfolds with the rhythm of all great oral traditions, each element serving multiple purposes. The Mapinguari's distinctive odor, so powerful it could be detected from great distances, serves as both narrative detail and practical warning about forest safety. Its backward-facing feet, leaving tracks that point away from its true direction, become lessons about the deceptive nature of first impressions and the importance of looking deeper than surface appearances. The creature's mouth, the grandmother explains, touching her own belly, was said to be located here, in its center, where it could consume not just food, but the very essence of those who threatened the forest's balance. But to children who showed patience and respect, to hunters who took only what they needed, the Mapinguari was a teacher and protector. The children know that this story serves as more than entertainment. Embedded within its fantastic elements lie practical lessons about forest navigation, warnings about dangerous areas where strong odors might indicate actual threats, and guidance about respectful interaction with wildlife. The Mapinguari's characteristics, its size, its association with dense forest, its role as guardian, encode thousands of years of accumulated ecological wisdom Different versions of the tale emerge from various Amazonian communities, each adapted to local geography and specific cultural values. In some tellings, the Mapinguari appears to lost travelers, offering guidance to those who approach humbly while leading astray those driven by exploitation or disrespect. Or other versions emphasize the creature's role in maintaining forest balance, punishing those who take more than their share or waste what the forest provides. The ethnographic records of the early 20th century document remarkable consistency in Mapinguari descriptions across widely separated indigenous communities. From the upper Amazon basin to the Atlantic coastal forests, similar characteristics appear. The enormous size, the distinctive odor, the backward feet, the association with deep forest and hidden places. These shared elements suggest either a common cultural origin for the stories or, more intriguingly, a shared memory of actual encounters with creatures that possess these characteristics. The correspondence between Mapinguari descriptions and what paleontologists have learned about ground sloth anatomy and behavior continues to generate scholarly interest and debate. Some researchers propose that the legends preserve cultural memories of the last surviving ground sloths, encounters that occurred when these massive creatures still inhabited remote forest refugia. The Mapinguari's described behavior, its slow, deliberate movement, its ability to rear up on hind legs, its association with caves and hidden places, aligns remarkably well with what fossil evidence reveals about ground sloth ecology. The stories serve functions that extend far beyond historical documentation. In contemporary Amazonian communities, Mapinguari tales continue to reinforce important cultural values about forest stewardship and respectful coexistence with wildlife. Children who grow up hearing these stories develop deep appreciation for the complexity and mystery of forest ecosystems. The legend's emphasis on the Mapinguari's protective role, its punishment of those who exploit the forest while rewarding those who approach with respect, provides a framework for understanding human relationships with the natural world. The creature becomes a symbol of the forest's own consciousness, its ability to recognize and respond to human intentions and actions. Modern conservation efforts have found unexpected allies in these traditional stories. Community leaders use Mapinguari legends to reinforce the importance of forest protection, drawing connections between ancient wisdom and contemporary environmental challenges. The stories provide cultural frameworks for understanding why forest conservation matters, grounding scientific arguments in deeply held cultural values. The Mapinguari's backward tracks become metaphors for the need to look beyond obvious explanations, to consider deeper meanings and hidden connections. Its formidable strength represents the forest's own power to defend itself when treated with respect, while its role as teacher emphasizes the importance of learning from rather than simply exploiting natural resources. In the flickering firelight, Grandmother Yara's voice carries these meanings forward to another generation. Her grandchildren will grow up knowing that the forest holds mysteries beyond their understanding, that patience and respect open doors that force and greed cannot breach, and that the stories of their ancestors contain wisdom as relevant today as it was centuries ago. The tale of the Mapinguari threads through Amazonian culture like the mighty river itself, carrying forward the accumulated knowledge of countless generations who learn to read the forest's subtle signs and respect its hidden depths. In every telling, the story plants seeds of wonder and caution, ensuring that future generations will approach the forest with the wisdom their ancestors encoded in legends, of creatures whose very existence reminds us that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. In the Emerald Hills of Costa Rica's Manuel Antonio region, morning mist clings to canopy bridges that stretch between fragments of forest like lifelines across a fragmented world. These engineered corridors represent one of conservation's most elegant solutions, allowing sloths to move safely above roads and developments that once created deadly barriers to their movement. The Sloth Conservation Foundation working with local communities and government agencies, has installed dozens of these canopy bridges throughout Costa Rica. Each installation represents a success story written in the safe passage of countless sloths who can now access feeding trees and mates without descending to ground level, where vehicle strikes pose the greatest threat to their survival. Rebecca Cliff, founder of the foundation, often tells the story of the first bridge installation near the town of Quepos. Local residents initially expressed skepticism about investing resources in structures for creatures they considered abundant. But within weeks of installation, motion-activated cameras documented regular sloth crossings, and vehicle strike reports from the area dropped dramatically. The current conservation status of sloth species reflects both challenges and hope. According to the most recent IUCN assessments, 3 of the 6 sloth species face varying degrees of threat. The brown-throated three-toed sloth, Bradypus variegatus, maintains a status of least concern as of 2022, with stable populations across its extensive range from Honduras to northern Argentina. However, the pygmy three-toed sloth, Bradypus pygmaeus, tells a different story. Confined to a single small island off the coast of Panama, this species carries the classification of critically endangered, with fewer than 100 individuals remaining in the wild. The manned three-toed sloth, Bradypus torquatus, faces significant pressure from habitat loss in Brazil's Atlantic coastal forest, leading to its classification as endangered in the most recent 2024 assessment. The two-toed sloths present a more optimistic picture. Both Hoffman's two-toed sloth, Cholopus hoffmanni, and the southern two-toed sloth, Cholopus didactylus, maintain least concern status as of 2022, though researchers emphasize the importance of continued monitoring as deforestation pressures intensify throughout their ranges. At the Sloth Institute in Costa Rica, founder Sam Troll has pioneered techniques for rehabilitating orphaned and injured sloths. Her approach emphasizes the importance of minimizing human contact while providing the specialized care these creatures require. Young sloths arrive at the facility after their mothers are killed by vehicle strikes or electrocuted on power lines, facing survival challenges that would be insurmountable without intervention. The rehabilitation process reflects deep understanding of sloth biology and behavior. Baby sloths require specific temperature regulation, specialized diets that match the nutritional profile of their mother's milk, and carefully controlled environments that simulate forest conditions. Most critically, they need to develop the complex behavioral patterns necessary for survival in wild canopy environments. Troll's team has developed innovative techniques for teaching young sloths essential survival skills. Artificial trees with varying branch configurations help develop the precise motor skills needed for canopy navigation. Carefully selected leaf varieties introduce orphaned sloths to the complex decision-making processes involved in choosing appropriate food sources. Temperature-controlled environments teach thermoregulation skills that prove essential for wild survival. The success stories emerging from these conservation efforts demonstrate the resilience of sloth populations when provided with appropriate protection and support. Radiotelemetry studies of rehabilitated sloths show survival rates that approach those of wild-born individuals, with successful reproduction and normal behavioral patterns documented in released animals. One particularly encouraging development involves the recognition of sloth heterothermy as an adaptation rather than a limitation. Research conducted by Dr. Jonathan Pauly at the University of Wisconsin has revealed that sloths' ability to lower their body temperature during cooler periods actually represents a sophisticated energy conservation strategy that may help them adapt to climate change better than many other tropical species. The complex relationship between sloths, moths, and algae continues to yield insights relevant to conservation planning. Recent studies demonstrate that this three-way mutualism provides sloths with essential nutrients while supporting dozens of specialized arthropod species found nowhere else. Protecting sloth populations therefore preserves entire ecosystems of dependent organisms. Conservation efforts increasingly focus on habitat corridor creation rather than just protected area establishment. Sloths require continuous canopy connections to maintain genetic diversity between populations, making corridor development essential for long-term species survival. Projects throughout Central and South America now prioritize connectivity using sloth movement requirements as design criteria for landscape-scale conservation planning. Community engagement has proved essential for successful sloth conservation. In many regions, local residents who once viewed sloths as insignificant now participate actively in protection efforts. Environmental education programs emphasize the ecological importance of sloths as seed dispersers and as indicators of forest health. Economic incentives increasingly support conservation goals. Ecotourism focused on sloth observation provides local communities with sustainable income sources that depend on maintaining healthy forest ecosystems. Tour guides trained in sloth ecology share accurate information with visitors while ensuring that observation activities do not disturb wild animals. The development of sloth-friendly infrastructure extends beyond canopy bridges to include wildlife corridors in urban planning, power line modifications that reduce electrocution risks, and road designs that minimize vehicle strike potential. These approaches demonstrate how conservation science can integrate with human development to create landscapes that support both human communities and wildlife populations. Recent genetic research has revealed previously unknown diversity within recognized sloth species, suggesting that current conservation efforts may need refinement to protect distinct populations. This ongoing research emphasizes the importance of continued scientific investigation alongside immediate conservation action. The soft rustle of leaves carries forward these modern conservation stories, each successful bridge crossing and successful rehabilitation representing hope for creatures whose patient persistence may yet outlast the challenges of a rapidly changing world. Rain begins to fall on the forest canopy above, each drop finding its way through layers of leaves to nourish the complex web of life below. Water runs down cecropia trunks, pools in bromeliads, and sustains the delicate balance that has allowed sloths to thrive for 40 million years. In this elemental rhythm of moisture and growth, we find the essence of what these remarkable creatures represent: persistence through patience, survival through harmony rather than conflict. The sloth, hanging motionless in the canopy above, embodies lessons that extend far beyond the boundaries of any single species or ecosystem. In a world increasingly driven by urgency and acceleration, these creatures demonstrate the profound power of deliberate action, of taking time to observe before acting, of understanding that survival often depends not on outrunning challenges, but on outlasting them. From the massive ground sloths that once shaped entire landscapes through patient excavation to the modern species that nurture gardens in their fur, this lineage has consistently chosen adaptation over aggression, cooperation over competition. The moth-algae sloth partnership represents evolution at its most creative, demonstrating how seemingly impossible relationships can develop when species commit to long-term collaboration rather than short-term exploitation. The scientific journey that transformed sloths from ridiculed failures to recognized marvels reflects humanity's own evolution in understanding natural complexity. Early dismissive characterizations gave way to growing appreciation as researchers learned to measure success in ecological terms rather than human expectations. The discovery that sloth slowness represents sophisticated energy management strategies challenged fundamental assumptions about what constitutes adaptive advantage. Cultural perspectives from indigenous peoples of the Americas preserved wisdom about sloth behavior and ecological importance long before Western science developed tools to verify these insights. The Mapinguari legends of the Amazon, the forest spirit beliefs of the Matsugenka, and similar traditions from across the Americas encoded deep ecological knowledge in narrative forms that ensured its transmission across generations. Modern conservation successes demonstrate that when we align human activities with rather than against natural processes, remarkable recovery becomes possible. Canopy bridges restore connections severed by roads, rehabilitation centres provide second chances for injured individuals, and community-based conservation creates economic incentives for forest protection. Each success story represents hope for species whose survival strategies have proven remarkably resilient when given appropriate support. The current conservation outlook for sloths reflects both the challenges facing tropical forest ecosystems and the potential for positive outcomes when scientific understanding combines with community commitment and adequate resources. While some species face significant threats, others maintain stable populations, and innovative conservation approaches continue to develop new solutions for emerging challenges. Perhaps most importantly, sloths offer a different way of understanding our relationship with time itself. In their deliberate movements through forest canopies, in their weekly descents to forest floors, in their patient approach to every aspect of survival, they demonstrate that sustainable existence often requires rejecting the assumption that faster is always better. As night settles over the forest and the sounds of day give way to those of approaching darkness, the sloth remains suspended in its chosen tree, breathing in rhythm with the forest around it. Its presence connects this moment to an unbroken chain of existence that stretches back through geological epochs, linking the present to a past we can barely imagine, and extending forward into a future we can help shape through the choices we make today. The world turns softly, and this creature turns with it.